Evening, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you're all well. The channel is called The Invisible Hand, ironically, as that's exactly what we're fucking talking about here. I might subscribe and like the video, even though I've only listened to about 10 seconds of this video, and I thought, yeah, this is exactly what we're fucking talking about here. If every country is in debt, who's the money owed to? So, this is it's a very interesting question, to be honest. So apparently we owe nearly 3.2 trillion to the Bank of England, right? Bank of England. So apparently we owe 3.2 trillion to ourselves. That's how some people think of it, but it's not like that at all, to be honest. And the Americans owe 34 trillion, I think, to the Federal Reserve of America, which in essence is exactly the same as the Bank of England, just under a different name. It's a centralised bank that prints money at debt. So, who owns all the centralised banks? And I think you'll find it's probably the same people that own all the same banks. I just noticed this here about BlackRock. Basically, BlackRock own everything in the world as well. BlackRock, if you've never heard of BlackRock. So, anyway, moving on, national debt, centralised banks. So, most countries in the world, if not pretty much all of them, have a centralised bank like the Bank of England, like the Federal Reserve of America, under many, many different names, all with the kind of name that would suggest that the country and the government have something to do with the running and the regulation of this entity. They do not. The governments are at the mercy of these people, of the banks, of these centralized banks, and whoever owns them. So I haven't watched the video. It's probably going to be more factual than my information. But for long ago, I learned that the the people who owned the centralized banks were kind of what some people call the 12 families of the Illuminati: the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Baron Sachs, the Astors, the Lees, possibly the royal family, the Windsors. But them kind of people were all in league together in the centralized banks. Is the crack I heard in passing, probably in a YouTube video. So I don't know if that's the truth. To be honest, this guy might tell us in more detail and who actually runs and owns these, and who's making all this money off all. Because these people, if you're making money off the whole, I mean, it was a Rothschild, I believe, who said, "I care not who makes a country's laws. Give me the power to print the nation's money," or something like that. So I've fucked that right up, to be honest. But it's along them lines. It's something like, I care not who makes the laws if I have the ability to print the nation's money. Is something along the lines of what he said. So that I believe the Rothschilds are involved in the centralized banks, possibly the Rockefellers and other ones. But this video might explain it and tell us. So I just thought it was a very interesting video because a lot of people don't know how the economy works in the first place and why we print money at debt and why we're 3.2 trillion in debt, and this is escalating inflation, which is why everything costs a fortune. So it's all kind of connected, and it's all massively affects your everyday life. Everyday life is affected by the economy and the national debt every single day, and it's only going to get worse, and your life's going to get worse because we're going to sink into poverty due to this debt. So it's a very interesting question. Who the fuck do we owe this money to? So let's play a bit of this.
America is $36 trillion in debt. That's a number so big it's nearly impossible to comprehend, but it's still money owed to someone. People often point to China as the biggest lender, and sure enough, they hold about $750 billion worth of it. But here's the thing, China is also drowning in debt of its own. In fact, over $18 trillion worth and counting. So who's holding their debt? A lot of it sits with Chinese banks, but those same banks also own debt from the United States. And American banks, they're holding debt from China and Europe and just about everyone else. If that sounds confusing, it's because
It fucking is. I mean, as I've said before, it's I mean, this is another side of it as well. This is another side of the whole affair, and having debt on other people. I'm talking about centralized banks, and as you mentioned there, it was just billions was owed to China and things. We're talking trillions here, and this is to the Federal Reserve. So I'll maybe get into this anyway.
It is. The deeper you go, the more entangled it all becomes. Every country is borrowing, every country is lending, and somehow the world is now $300 trillion in debt, triple the size of the actual global economy. But if the world is in this much debt, then who is it all owed to? It's a really simple question, but one with a surprisingly complicated answer. It's not just a weird accounting trick, but a clue that something much deeper is happening under the surface. The answer reveals how the modern world isn't built on stability, it's built on motion, on a never-ending cycle of borrowing, lending, and reinvesting. This is the story of how global debt became the engine of the modern world, and what would happen if people really stopped lending. Debt might sound like a
The whole system will probably collapse.
modern problem, just a big, scary number on a government spreadsheet. But in reality, it's one of the oldest ideas in human history. Long before banks, before coins or paper money, debt was simply a promise. Imagine lending your neighbor a bag of grain in the spring. When harvest
Well, yeah, I mean, if you go and get one of your banknotes now, if you can still get hold of one, it actually says on all English notes, 5, 10, and £20, I promise to pay. It actually says that on the note, I promise to pay. Yeah, you're passing around promises, to be honest, and it goes back to the Jews, and the Jews used to be the money lenders, and you used to give them gold, and they would give you a note, which, because you didn't want to carry gold all the way off of the country because you might get robbed. You would give your gold to the money lenders, and they would give you a note saying you had so much gold with them, and you could buy things based on the note because you had the gold, and you didn't have to carry the gold around and get mugged for your gold. You just had a note, and you couldn't get mugged for the note, or you could, but the person couldn't take the note and claim the gold because they weren't you. So it was a good system for its time, but it kind of developed to the point where the note became the actual currency that we were using to buy things with. But on all English notes, it does actually say, if you look for it, I promise to pay.
came, they'd pay you back, maybe with a little extra as a thank you. No interest rates, no complicated contracts, just trust. Because for thousands of years, humans understood a simple concept. Sometimes you need something right away, but can only pay for it later. That's all debt really is at its core. Borrowing from tomorrow to solve a problem today. Over time, simple personal loans evolved into something much bigger. Kings wanted castles, empires needed ships and cannons, but no single lender could foot the bill. In the 1600s, England faced this exact same problem. King Charles II was preparing for war with the Dutch, but the treasury was empty, and the nobles refused to lend. So they tried something new. They sold pieces of debt to the public. In return for cash, citizens got a written promise of repayment with interest, a bond. It was simple, but it changed everything. States could now raise huge sums of money without raising taxes or draining their treasuries, and by the 20th century, bonds went global. World War I and II pushed countries to borrow at an unprecedented scale, not just to fight, but to rebuild. Then, in 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement made the US dollar the centerpiece of the global financial system. Currencies were tied to the dollar was tied to gold, but gold was limited, and economies had to grow. As the US ramped up spending, there wasn't enough gold to back the flood of dollars in circulation. So in
Yeah, this is called the gold standard, and it was removed by Reagan and Thatcher, I believe, unless it's going to say it was.
1971, President Nixon broke the link, ending the gold standard.
It was Nixon. It was Nixon. But I believe it was Thatcher as well in the UK.
From that point on, money became what we now call fiat currency, not backed by gold or anything physical, just by government decree. Governments could now create at will, and if that sounds like a recipe for endless borrowing, it was. From the
Yeah, I've mentioned this before. It's a recipe for disaster. You can print as much money as you want, but ultimately doing that deflates the value of the currency. So that's kind of That's kind of what's happening. The more money we print, the less that each individual pound is worth, and that's why everything's going up in cost, because the value of the pound is decreasing because of the national debt, and we're printing money like there's no tomorrow. £5,170 a second, apparently. So this is devaluing the current currency, hence the inflation. So again, removing the gold standard, it ultimately caused this. We couldn't do this before the removal of the gold standard. So on removal, that was kind of known, I think, in the background what would happen. Is why I kind of think if it's a plan at this point to crash all the economies and bring in a one world currency, because that's what they're kind of doing at this point. We're tipping the point of no return on all these debts.
1980s onwards, global debt exploded. Countries discovered that borrowing wasn't just useful in wartime, it could fuel the economy's growth too. And so borrow they did, to build schools, repair roads, and even to carry the economy out of recession.
Yeah, a lot of people think your taxes pay for all these things. They don't. That's the lie or the misconception, or it's just what. But you're never corrected on it. You're not told. It's just they would like you to believe that your taxes pay for all these things, but they don't. We just print money at will, and this is how we pay for everything, by printing money at will. And at this point, I think everybody's taxes just go towards paying the interest on the national debt, because we pay £105 billion a year in interest. So a lot of the tax money goes to just paying the interest in the national debt, and we need to print more money to do all the other things. So we're sort of caught in this vicious cycle at this point of printing money. We can't get out of it. But ultimately, as the bigger the debt goes, the less the pound's worth, the poorer we all are.
Debt became the engine of progress for first and third world countries alike, and over time, it stopped being a last resort and became the norm. Today, debt is how things get built, how crises get managed, and how promises get kept. And the result? A global debt mountain that now tops $300 trillion, more than 3 times the value of everything the world makes in a year. To put that into perspective, a stack of $1 million bills would be 100 meters tall, and about the height of a 30-story building. $1 billion would reach 100 kilometers, high enough to touch the Earth's atmosphere, but 300 trillion is enough to go to the moon and back 50 times. That's the amount of debt that we're talking about. So
let's take that in. Let's pause a moment and take in exactly what he said there. The amount of the world's debt. So again, this is what I mentioned before, collapsing all the world's economies. So put all the world's debt together and pile the notes high, and we can get to the moon and back 30 times. That's how much debt this world is in. A lot of people don't understand what's coming, to be honest, because you don't understand economics. And, well, yeah, you don't understand economics, to be honest. That's ultimately why you don't know what's coming. But it's... I mean, you've got to grasp the scope of that. Do you know what I mean? That if we pile the money high of how much debt this world is in, we could get to the moon and back 30 times. Now, the moon's fucking far away. I don't know if you don't know that. But it's quite a distance away, the moon. So that's quite a lot of fucking money, you know what I mean? In debt, the world. So who plans to pay this off ever? You know what I mean? And unfortunately, like as you said there, this has been going on a long time. But in 1980s, or 70s, we removed the gold standard, and we went berserk basically. So it kind of held its water till we removed the gold standard, and then we've now broke the system basically. We've broke it because we printed too much money. So ultimately, it has to collapse, is what's going to happen. It just might take a long time to fizzle out in how it collapses. But again, if the UK goes into any sort of civil war or anything like this at all, then how much we pay back on the debt will increase whilst we're printing more money, which will absolutely destroy the country and the financial... I mean, the people... I mean, I can't... You would have to go and look at like countries where like it's a failed state in Africa, and for how bad it could get. I put that video up anyway the other day there about people with possible scenarios if the UK went to civil war, and all them are the possible scenarios of what could happen, and it could, once the country's fractured and not producing what it should, that will affect the GDP, which will affect how much we pay back on the global markets because it's all connected and all linked, and the country's profitability and prosperity. So it will be absolute Doomsville, Tennessee at that point, but it kind of is anyway because we just keep printing fucking money like there's no tomorrow. So if everybody understood economics, they would realise how much shit we're in, really, in the future. And never mind all the migrants, but we haven't got a future because of this. Do you know what I mean? We're all going to be economic slaves, basically, if you could understand how this is going to play out.
So, if every country is borrowing, who are they borrowing from? And if everyone owes money, who's getting paid? When we talk about the national debt, it's easy to picture some big, powerful, shadowy figure pulling the strings and holding all the money. But that's not how it works. Because modern debt doesn't just move in straight lines like we're used to, it moves in circles. To better understand this concept, let's zoom in on the United States, the world's most indebted country. You may be wondering who can possibly lend them that much money. But here's the surprising part. Roughly 70% of the debt is actually owed to Americans themselves. So the US borrows from itself. Here's how it works. We know that governments borrow money by issuing bonds and promising to pay it back with interest, the exact same way that you would borrow money from a bank. So who is buying these government bonds? Well, most likely you. When you put money into the bank, it doesn't just sit there in a vault. Banks put the money to work, trying to grow it so they can pass some interest back to you, which they do by lending, investing, and of course buying bonds. As of now, commercial banks in the US hold nearly $1.8 trillion worth of US Treasury bonds, triple the entire GDP of countries like Brazil or Canada. Bonds are an incredibly popular investment because they're one of the safest ways to earn interest on spare cash. Unlike the stock market, they don't bounce up and down every day. Of course, the interest rate can still be changed by the government to help manage the economy. And in the 1980s, yields jumped to over 15% as the government tried to bring down high inflation. And during the COVID recovery in 2020, they dropped below 1% to encourage more spending. But whenever you buy a bond, the rate is fixed until you get paid back fully. So whatever the government does afterwards isn't your problem. A 10-year US government bond today will pay you a steady 4.5% interest per year, which is pretty good considering the near zero risk. And that's a big part of why bonds and debt are so popular. So of course, it's not just banks who buy up the bonds, it's anyone sitting on a large pool of money. Pension funds, insurance companies, investment firms, they all do the same thing. Buy bonds and earn interest.
Right, so has everyone sort of followed that? So it's kind of your money, all the money in the banks use your money, this is how you get your interest, they buy bonds from the debt. So we print the money, and then they owe all these banks the money, and it's all a big circle, as he kind of said there. So this is why as well, though, like the national debt, not only is it on your head as a member of the public, it's your money in the first place that this government spends willy-nilly and spends us into an oblivion. It's our money. So this is why people should be outraged at what goes on, to be honest, because the fucking us over with our own money is the beauty of it. You know what I mean? We're like 3.2 trillion in debt here. Yeah, we didn't spend a fucking penny here. You know what I mean? We've tried to help out here by putting money in the bank, and the bank's fucked us by fucking buying debt with it. So it's kind of not complicated, really, but it's made to look more complicated than it is. And this is why not many people understand what really happens and how it happens and why we're sinking here. So this is why I brought the video forward, to be honest. I probably won't get through all of it, so go and watch it on The Invisible Hand, 179,000 subscribers. But very interesting. I'll play a bit more though, because he's kind of hasn't finished really this explanation.
In 2024, US pension funds invested a quarter of all their money into bonds. And for an insurance company, this number was even higher. Over 60% of their assets were placed in bonds, using them as a reliable way to grow their funds while keeping risk low. This creates a kind of hidden network where people's savings become loan money for the government. So, although it may sound weird that the US is borrowing from itself, it's actually just money flowing from parts of the country where it's sitting idle to parts where it's needed and being spent. When the government pays interest on its debt, that money flows right back into the hands of the lenders, giving them even more spare cash. And what do they do with it? They buy more bonds and earn more interest. This becomes a sort of self-reinforcing loop, where money constantly cycles through the same system by moving from lender to borrower, then back to lender, and then back to borrower, over and over. And the same loop exists between countries too. About 30% of US debt is held overseas, because just like American banks or pension funds, foreign governments and banks also put their spare cash into US bonds. And following the same logic, money flows in when we borrow, back out when we return, and repeats. Now remember, it's not just the US doing this. Every country is borrowing and every country is lending. The Japanese savings become loans for the Dutch savings become loans for the Brazilians, and the Brazilian savings, they end up flowing back into American bonds. The world's debt isn't just a pile of unpaid bills waiting to explode. It's more like an interconnected web of circular systems, where money flows in loops from savers to borrowers and back again. Governments borrow, investors lend, and the interest payments keep the cycle going. And while some of that money crosses borders, most of it never really leaves the system. It just changes form, hands, and keeps moving. So if the government keeps borrowing and spending it all, how do they pay back their debt in the future? Well, here's the thing. They simply just borrow more debt to pay back their old debt. And although that might sound reckless, which it kind of is, it's actually the foundation of how the global economy now works. So why does this system just keep going? Why doesn't the world just stop borrowing? Because now we're in a point where everything, from our economy to our politics, is built around debt. The uncomfortable truth is that debt fuels growth. When the government borrows and spends, money circulates into the economy. Businesses earn more, workers get paid, and so they spend more. It becomes a feedback loop that keeps the economy expanding so everyone can be better off. In China, 19% of all government spending comes from debt, meaning 1 in every 5 yuan they spend is actually borrowed. And this figure is even higher in the US, around 1 in 4 dollars. That's the same amount of money it spends on both education and welfare combined. If the government suddenly stops borrowing, it would have to spend less, and money stops flowing into the economy. Businesses earn less, workers lose their jobs, and so they stop spending. That very same loop that grows the economy is turned upside down, leaving everyone worse off. Take Greece, for example. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, investors panicked and suddenly stopped buying Greek bonds because they seemed so risky. Greece was left unable to borrow and quickly ran out of money to spend. 1 in 4 public workers were fired. Wages fell.
Yeah. Gremlins in the machine.
By 30%, and over the next few years, their GDP shrank by a whopping 25%. Politicians know this, and so do the people. Everyone wants the government to keep on spending, so the economy can keep on growing, and so no one wins elections promising austerity. Spending continues, and borrowing becomes inevitable.
Yeah, we're caught in this cycle at this point.
But it's not just about growth. Sometimes it's about survival. When an economic crisis hits, like COVID in 2020, people stop spending and the economy shuts down. The only way out of this is for the government to step in and cover that spending people are unwilling to do. In a crisis when people aren't paying their taxes, they have to borrow. In 2020, the US government borrowed an astonishing $3.8 trillion in a single year.
That's more than we owe. We owe nearly 3.2 trillion. But our country's a lot smaller than America. But yeah, in COVID, they borrowed that in 1 year.
20% of their entire economy. And so did China, Europe, and every other economy out there. It wasn't a choice, but a necessity. Now, remember, when you borrow money, it must be returned in the future. And if a government is already spending everything it collects just to keep the economy going, where does the money to repay old debt come from? The answer is simple. To pay back what they borrow again. And this debt just never leaves the system. In wealthier countries like Germany and Switzerland, this isn't seen as a major problem. Their bonds are considered safe, so they can keep on borrowing at low interest rates, making debt easier to cycle through.
Yeah, see, it's saying about being safe there. If anything happens to the UK, Civil War-wise, the bonds wouldn't be considered safe. It would be hard to borrow. This would fracture the economy. again, you would be living in times that none of us have ever seen. To be honest, none of us ever seen. It would be catastrophic if anything like that happens in the UK because of what would happen to the borrowing. So I'll play a bit more. Just
But for developing nations, it's a different story. Higher borrowing costs make each rollover more expensive, and over time, the debt starts to feed on itself. Countries like Sri Lanka and Pakistan have found themselves in a debt trap where they are forced to just keep borrowing to meet the interest payments on past loans. So when people ask in America, why can't we just stop borrowing? The truth is that we can't. The same debt that weighs us down are actually the very pillars that the entire economy was built upon. And this raises an uncomfortable question. Can it really go on like this forever? Because no matter how smooth the cycle seems, there are risks building beneath the surface. Risks that the
yeah, I keep mentioning them.
government avoids talking about, and that no one really wants to face. As the government continues to borrow, the debt grows, and so do the interest payments. Over time, a bigger and bigger slice of the budget goes back towards paying old loans, not funding new schools, hospitals, or infrastructure. Having a
Yeah, I say 105 billion we pay in interest at this point a year. It's a cycle of shit basically, and it's just going to get worse.
debt to GDP ratio near 100% is now seen as the normal, when a few decades
We're on 98.5%, but that will dramatically go over 100%, up to maybe 300% within the next couple of years predicted.
back, it would have been catastrophic. This isn't really a problem when borrowing is cheap and lenders are confident, but that all changes with risk. If investors stop wanting to lend, the cost of
Yeah, and again, if anything happens to the UK, the risk goes up, so it would kind of shatter the UK economically,
borrowing suddenly shoots up. One
which would probably decrease the value of the pound very quickly and a lot.
way governments try to handle this is by printing more money. This might sound like an easy fix, but it comes with a big downside. When more money enters the system, it reduces the value of each individual unit, and the result is inflation. Prices rise, savings shrink, and people start to feel poorer. In extreme cases, it can spiral out of control. In Venezuela in the late
It's called hyperinflation. Again, this could be a possibility should anything happen to the UK.
2010s, the government printed so much money to cover its debts that the price of goods doubled every few weeks. A loaf of bread that used to cost 10 bolivars suddenly cost millions. The currency became almost worthless, and ordinary people saw their life savings vanish overnight. While most countries don't face such
Yeah, see your savings, life savings, vanish overnight with hyperinflation. It happened in Germany. And yeah, people will get the shock of their lives should this happen and then take away all your savings through an economic collapse, basically. And this is very much a possibility now in these times with what's happening. And again, if anything happens to the UK that would fracture the UK in terms of a civil war, it would be this the kind of scenario that could take place. And very, very quickly, the scenario, not only would you be in a civil war, but the money would be rendered pretty much worthless. Everything would cost a fortune, and everybody would be struggling for everything. So it's very, very bleak, to be honest. But this is kind of what we're facing, and a good reason why we don't want a civil war, because people don't understand the ramifications of what could take place should one happen. It's not as simple as there could be a war. This goes very much into economics. I've run out of time here, but a very, very good video, a very interesting video, and it's bang on. It's all bang on, to be honest. It's all very, very factual. The Invisible Hand, 179,000 subscribers. So there's 13 minutes we played there. There's another 5 minutes of the video. Still printing money, gold, going into the gold and gold mining. There's a lot more. There's a little bit more to it as well. So if you go and watch the video on the channel, subscribe as well, because he knows his shit and he fucking might know what the fuck's going to happen here, to be honest. So I'll leave it there, but very interesting video. Peace.